You're live. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to our program item. And I've got three wonderful panelists. Sorry, my screen just came up slightly. And I'm just going to introduce you very briefly first to my cat. This is Lord Miles Vorkozy cat. He may soon bomb us very soon. But he's named after a Bujold character, which I'm sure will come up. Right, I would love my panelists to start by introducing themselves. Can we start with you, Jennifer?
I am Jennifer Blackstream. I write paranormal romance and urban fantasy.
Thank you. Gillian?
I'm Gillian Pollack, and I have to tell you it's 2 in the morning because I've been telling everybody else. I write contemporary fantasy, science fiction, and I am occasionally an academic researchy type person, and very occasionally a bit political.
And Andrea Hairston?
Okay, I'm Andrea Hairston. I write plays, novels, and essays. I teach theater at Smith College. And I have a new novel coming out with a whole lot of old broads in it. So I'm very excited to be on this panel.
Fantastic. And I introduced the cat, but not me. I'm Farah Mendelssohn. I think my main qualification for being on this one is I'm an aging woman, and that's good. But I thought we would start with that thing about aging. What have we found most surprising about aging and the culture of older women and growing older around us? Let's start from where we are in the world. Gillian, start us off.
The thing I've discovered is that it doesn't just differ from region to region, it differs from city to city. Canberra, where I live, women are off the notice board. You don't get new jobs. You're not noticed for 15 years. And then when you notice, you've changed your gender, basically, from age 40, which is way young, because Australia has a thing about ageism and is misogynistic. So I discovered that how you're treated for your age is very local.
Jennifer?
I think I have found that the idea of aging is different for me as somebody who is single and wants to stay that way than it is for some of my friends that are aging and single and want to be married. I feel like I have a lot more freedom. It is not stressing me out. I look at aging as a fantastic thing. I'm going to look fantastic with silver hair. Already got some, and it's nothing but positive. I look forward. It's leveling up for me. But I have noticed that some of my friends, if they still want to be married, they are a little more stressed by aging and don't have the same positive outlook.
Andrea?
Wow, I'm in the theater and you're old at 30.
Ooh.
And in Hollywood, roles disappear. There aren't roles. Characters aren't present. You don't get cast. If you're 35, you're playing the mother of someone who's 30. It's really, been a very, very interesting process to age in, theater and film as, a practitioner and as a writer and as a director and as a teacher. So my students, who are younger and the alums who are older face very different things. So recently, I think Jenna Davis talked about how her career ended. And then she was so startled at 40, and it was ending before that. The roles dry up starting with 30. Because all of the things that Gillian mentioned, the misogyny, but there's also a lack of characters. So most of the roles are written for either men of all ages or young women and a few old hags, right? So there's often not a lot for you to do. So you get women also playing older men. That was a classic thing that women did in the theater. So it's been very interesting as I age, and I'm not, that's not what I've ever been doing, to see myself in relation to professional theater or say Hollywood or television. And then as a writer of fiction, I don't have to deal with that. I write what I want. So I feel, yay.
And we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about what we want to see of aging women. But we seem to have quite fairly different experiences of aging. I didn't particularly want children, so that hasn't been an issue for me. And I'm never going to go silver, which I'm actually quite disappointed about. I may go blonde, and I'm fading, but it's not fair. I wanted grey hair. So one of the issues that Gillian raised in the green room earlier was that there are different cultures of growing older. And I wonder, when we anticipated aging, what were the models we were each given? What did we see around us as what older women should be like? And here I don't mean in popular culture, but I mean in our lived experience of the older women we knew. Andrew, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I think I have a very, very positive image of aging because of my great aunt and my grandmother, who were indomitable. I mean, so I wanted to be them, and they were old. And they were the forces in my world. So I, in fact, dedicate my second novel to my great aunt because she came to me and told me to write the book. I woke up with her voice in my head, and she was saying, "Write this book, write it now." And she was, like the sort of center of our world. So everybody deferred to her. She had all the wisdom. She was hoodoo, so she did the old ways, and people who were Christians were like, "Oh my God, there comes Estelle." But everybody respected her. And she commanded full attention, respect. And she told us that we could do whatever we wanted. And then seeing her manifest that, I was like, okay. And my goal, when I got to be the age I am now, was to be her. Because she was like one of the best people I knew. And the same thing with a lot of the older women. So the older women were the rocks. So that's my image of aging.
I mean, that actually ties into something I once said, that the actual problem I find with a lot of so-called feminist YA is that they lack, however feisty the young girl, there aren't any older women for them to grow up to be. And that's a real lack. Gillian, over to you. Older women in your life, the role models you grew up with.
Millions of older women, and some older characters in Jewish legend, basically, but really conflicting models, hitting themselves on the head and arguing inside my brain. Within the family, there was respect, especially for the Anglo side of the family, because my father's first cousin was a major composer. So I'd never know whether respect was for the fact that she lived to 104, the fact that she was indomitable, she was amazing, or the fact that she was my father's first cousin and older. It's one of those things where you can't separate the family member from the attitude. In the community, I'm Australian. Older women are mostly silenced, where we tend to be invisible. Look at Australian actors and calculate how many Helen Mirrens there are, and how many there should be given the wealth of acting talent in Australia. And in Australian feminist circles, when I was really active in them, I haven't been active in them for a while now, but when I was really active, we were taught to be stroppy when we were in our 30s, because if you're not stroppy, you cannot deal with the actuality of everyday life. So that was three very different models, and I put all of them in my fiction because that's wonderful character stuff.
Jennifer, the older women in your life.
I had amazing older women in my life. I would have said, if you had asked me when I was younger, that I have a matriarchal family. It was the women were in power. I grew up with, they're involved in the PTA. My mom got the key to the city for running Safety Town for our town for years. My grandma had dinners every Sunday, and I mean, she checked in on everybody. And it wasn't until I got older that I noticed that a lot of times I would hear them say, well, we have to ask your father, we have to ask grandpa. But I always felt that it was sort of like, you remember my big fat Greek wedding when
Yes.
the mother said the father might be the head of the family, but the woman is the neck and she can turn the head any way she wants. That. If I wanted something, I went to my mom or my grandma. They were the ones getting things done. They were involved, they were hands-on, and very inspiring. I think I was very lucky.
So the word that seems to crop up a lot is indomitable. And I find myself wondering if this is the older woman's equivalent of feisty.
It's feisty with power behind it.
Oh, I like it. Feisty with power behind it. Gillian?
I think it's the opposite. Feisty is when you tackle things fresh. Indomitable is when you've been repressed so many times. It's not the rubber ball bouncing backwards after it's pressed. It's I will not be suppressed. Go away. Stop this idiot thing. And you change the person you're dealing with. It actually, indomitable women actually change the environment around them. And books that feature indomitable, you don't have to be feisty. You don't have to kick. You don't have to scream. You don't have to use a stop whip. You change the world by being. My indomitable influence was Helen Leonard, and she said you walk into big public meetings late with a camera, because that way you've made your voice heard before you even sit down.
And that ties into what I just noted down, which was the second life of older women, women who organize. That there does seem to be this point that women hit where they take charge. But I'm going to take that one into our next stage, which is, as older women reading, have our relationships to the fictions we loved changed? Are there fictions we loved when we were younger that we now kind of want to hit the heroine's head over with a mallet and say, you could do something? Or heroines that we didn't recognize as heroines when we read them and now we do? I mean, those are just throwaway questions, but has it changed how you read science fiction and fantasy? Andrea?
Actually, I don't think so. It's very odd because when I think by change, I think I always read from the moment I'm in. So that hasn't changed, right? So I feel like as I've grown older, I have, you know, I still love the stories I love because okay, this could be because I'm a theater person. So I drop into my 10-year-old and I read the story through that and I can remember that and I love that. Or I can drop in as my 30-year-old. So I think what maybe has changed is I can read it from 5 different views from my whole life. And at each moment, there's the stuff I loved when I was 10 is still there. And then I add to that. So it's not so much that I want to hit the heroine over the head. I can just turn my head and go, oh, look at this over here. Oh, look at that over there. And so I think one of the things that aging has given me is that I have more compassion for myself. I think when I was younger, I wanted to hit characters over the head.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, now, I feel like, oh, okay, because I thought, oh, I know better. I'm bad at, I can do everything, and now I think, God, things are hard. So I think I have more compassion. I guess that's why I was saying that I don't want to hit them over the head, but maybe I have changed. I have more compassion and I have more, we all stumble, we all fall, we all have to get back up. So I think I have that compassion for books that I read in 1970 or 1980. The people then didn't have the experiences that I have now.
And we've got a couple comment here that feisty always reads as vaguely sexualized, or feisty can feel a bit patronizing. And I don't disagree, but I do wonder if indomitable can actually fit into the same category.
Well, I think of indomitable. When I was thinking of that, I was thinking of rock. So
I like it.
There was a play called You Strike the Women, You Strike the Rock, right? And so, and that to me is bedrock. That to me is the earth. That to me is the roots. So I think what I felt about my great aunt is that she was deeply connected and rooted and clear. And so she would not be moved unless there was a real reason. I mean, she didn't sway in the various winds. And so that's what I was thinking. So it wasn't sexual at all, but it was more, in relation to the community. She was the mother tree. And by mother tree, I don't mean mother as in these are my children, but like, oh my God, that one knows, all of this stuff. And therefore, we can rely on the sturdiness of that tree.
Jennifer, you wanted to come in.
I think in some people use feisty as in a placating way, almost the way we are starting to use badass to refer to female characters. We say feisty instead of assertive in some cases. Right. And we say badass when we want to say strong, but it's not actual strength, we want to see more agency. Like a lot of actresses are saying they're starting to avoid roles that are described as badass because it means you still don't have a lot of agency, but we've given you guns, or we've given you
you're allowed to
martial.
kick somebody.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people, when I hear particularly men describe a woman as feisty, it's almost like, oh, isn't that cute? You're being assertive.
So we've had a comment which picks up on some early things. Oh, Gillian, come in first, please.
Can I bring both the things together, the feisty, indomitable, and the how I read, because they actually fit together really neatly for me. The thing that I learnt by getting older is that the really powerful women have an intensely rich life experience, which is quite hard to fit into the neat little confines of a novel. So, and my example for that when I teach this is always Ursula Le Guin, because when she does it brilliantly, always going home. All her characters have rich life experience. Lavinia, it doesn't matter how much Lavinia goes through, she doesn't have that rich life experience, as if she doesn't learn from what happens to her. And so she fits into the two ends of the way I read. So when I was 19, I assumed that all characters only needed a few years of stuff. But when you're 59, you draw on 40 years more experience. And if you haven't, and a lot of us don't waste a second because life's short. And that's the thing that gets left out in most characterization of women in novels. And how does that fit in with feisty? It's all about agency. Feisty is when the character has a certain type of agency. Indomitable is when a character has another sort. But how often is that a plot points that linked to older women's life experience?
That's fascinating. I'm going, though, to move on to something that's actually asked, and it was tied into that throwaway I made about women to grow into. Shell says, I like to see strong relationships with mothers in YA, as opposed to the mother being an emotional wreck or absent, which I see all too often. And we can drop the YA and just talk about all fiction. So is that sense of a relationship with the mother or the mother figure, the woman who, I'm conscious not all of us, including me, have great relationships with our mothers. So I'm trying to say, let's take it slightly wider, but is that part of that depth of experience? Jennifer?
In my urban fantasy series, my witches, the title for a witch, the title of respect is mother. And in my book, because I did there's a little bit of time travel involved there, but her mentor, the witch who trained her, is Mother Hazel. And I did try to make her a maternal figure in the little moments, like when she's really upset, she's there in the kitchen with her and, they're sharing a meal or she's making her favorite meal. And it's those little moments of comfort that I think are very strong. And also she leads by example. So you get to see this powerful witch, and this is her role model, showing both strength and small moments of kindness, because they're both so important.
Right. And I realize I'm nodding at Gillian, who does not know I'm nodding at her because we're online. Gillian.
Yes. I did something quite different with the novel. So it's comparing two things. So when I wanted to write about, the first time I wanted to write a book that was primarily about older women, not one older woman, but three older women working together, as a lot of women do. The youngest was 60, which to now mean, I think, why did I think of her as older? But a few years ago, I felt that she was heading towards older. Now I think, nah, she's got a decade ahead. Things change. But what I did, because I knew that I didn't have primary knowledge of those age groups, and I noticed that all the information I was given was as women as mothers or women as crones. There were certain, or women as disposable. There were a couple of other categories, but they weren't what I wanted. I didn't want categories. So I got three focus groups together for each age group and said, what are the things you remember? How do you see yourself? And what I discovered, and what I did with my novel, was that every single one of the women I talked to had a much richer life than that encapsulated by their motherhood. So they could still be perfectly motherly. So what I did with Time of the Ghost is the children don't appear. It's what I asked them. I asked these women, when your children ring you up, do they ask about your day? Do they listen to what you've done? And the answer was, no, they did not. And I said, well, do you want to be superhero or villain? And they voted for superhero. And so I had their private life as sorting out problems with ghosts and werewolves and things. Because that I couldn't see that in literature. It was bugging me that we had this mother figure who didn't have a private life, but all the women I spoke to had private lives.
That's fantastic. And that actually responds to a question, or not, a comment. Can the indomitable dowager empress or aging mercenary captain also be silly or mistaken or playful? And that seems to be a response to that, as is demonstrated by the mug you just lifted up. Please lift up your mug again. There we go, silly and playful.
The other side is even better. It's the private life bit.
Oh, splendid. Andrea, again, talk about your work, since everybody's talked about their own now.
Okay, well, I will stop my video for a moment, and there's the cover of my latest novel, Master of Poisons. And that novel will be out in like two weeks. Oh my God, September 8th.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and in it there are like 5 or 6 major characters who are older women. So they are all different sorts of characters. And there's also an older character who is neither male nor female. So, and in that world, they're called Vasons. And these are all, you know, very important characters who have inner lives, who have lives beyond their children, who don't even have children. Some of them interact. Some of them, one of them is called Vandana, and she comes from beyond the maps. And she comes into this world, and she is an adventurer, and we don't quite know why she's there. And she uses all that she knows and is going to take back all that she finds to her culture. So one of the things that I did is I used the research that I had done on West African, African-American, Caribbean, indigenous women, and the sorts of things that women did after they were no longer mothers, as well as what they did before. And all of it is different. And I decided, wow, this is really amazing. Stuff I didn't know myself. So I was fascinated about the issue of being a mother as defining your entire life. And I wanted to dispense with that, so that it was a part of your life. You didn't have to give it up. You could enjoy it. It was wonderful, but it wasn't the only thing that defined you. And that was what I was thinking about as I was dealing with the characters. You could be also the queen of your realm, have children, and be engaged in 5 different things. So I wanted to have like a polyrhythm of women's lives rather than just the single downbeat that I'd experienced, too much in mostly, I would say films and plays, but also in some fiction, because I tend to try to find the book like New Moon, the New Moon's Arms, like the Nalo's book, which I love.
You've beaten me to my recommendation.
Oh, okay. So that, a book like that, that's the book that I've been looking for forever. And I found it and I keep reading it because it's such a joy. So, I've been looking for those books. So when I read, I'm more selective than I am when I watch films or do plays.
Can I say, I was going to recommend New Moon's Arms, so I will do it now. And it's the only book I know of in which the heroine is going through menopause. So for all of you who right now are dealing with hot flushes and a sense that the world, and we've got another one, the year of the fruitcake.
I have a whole group of women going through.
Absolutely.
One of them alien.
Let me recommend New Moon's Arms first,
yes,
because it's an absolutely wonderful novel in which one's hot flushes slide the world around.
I love it.
You can come back to yours later. But I want to start taking questions. So please, people, start typing your Q&As in. And while we wait for the Q&As to come in, nominate a book that you would like to recommend in which the age of an older woman in science fiction and fantasy affects the plot. So it's not just they're an older woman, but that it matters that they're an older woman. There you go.
That's a surprisingly difficult one. There are very few.
I will give you a wonderful film, Daughters of the Dust. And there's the older woman at the center of that film. It matters that she is old. it matters. And she's one of those root women. And she is deciding to go with the traditions of her, of all the people, and other people are moving away, and they come to celebrate the people leaving and the people staying. And in that film, which I highly recommend if you haven't seen it, there's an unborn child who is present. There are all the women who are of a certain age, and then there are the older women. So it is a real treat to see the range of ages, and everyone's age matters, including the older women.
That's the thing,
Gillian?
isn't it? That age matters, not
Yeah.
being young or being old, but your age is part. The age is part of the character.
Yes.
While you're waiting, I will go for House Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, which is a bit of a cheat in that Sophie's actually young, but she loves the fact that being old liberates her to do things and to say rude things to people. And to just basically, well, what's the phrase? She has no more fucks to give. I mean, obviously, Diana Wynne Jones would not have used this in the book intended for 14-year-olds, but that's the basic attitude. And while you're thinking, Darcy asks for a repeat of the title. So it's New Moon's Arms by Narlow Hopkinson. We've got recommendations for Elizabeth Moon's Remnant Population, Sherry Tepper's The Fresco, Vonda McIntyre's Starfarers. Everybody is going to faint with shock, but I would actually say Heinlein's very final book that everybody rubbishes, To Sail Beyond the Sunset, is all about aging and has some fabulous scenes of Maureen discovering feminism and telling men to piss off. We actually have the scene where the guy in the boardroom treats her like a secretary and then is terribly shocked to discover she owns the majority shares. You just know he got that from a woman he'd met. So, Jennifer, you've not had a chance to offer a title?
Honestly, I'm trying to think of one that isn't a romance and doesn't end with, and then
it can be a romance. It's okay.
Yeah.
We get to have sex after we're 60.
What was
we get to fall in love.
There was a movie, Diane Keaton and Jack Nicholson.
Oh,
I know which movie you mean, but I don't know the title.
It was on Golden Pond, but was that it, or was it?
No, that's Henry. That's Henry Fonda and
shows how
Katharine
much
Hepburn.
movies I watch, doesn't it?
as good as it gets.
Yes, I think.
No,
Helen
Hunt.
But meanwhile, we're probably not going down the Mary Zimmer Bradley route, but Louis McMaster Bujold, who none of you have recommended yet, when Cordelia goes on her shopping trip, that's definitely an older woman using her power. For those who've not read it, she goes on a shopping trip and comes back with the head of a general. It's fantastic. And somebody notes that Gentleman Joel is very much about Cordelia's time of life.
I need to admit that whenever I'm coming out with a topic, a title, someone's just already put it up on chat. So I'm not repeating. So I'm stuck because they beat me to it.
I'm aware that not everybody's in chat. So I'm reading some of them as they come up.
So for me, Vonda McIntyre uses age very precisely in everything. She doesn't always use older women, but age is always a factor in her characters.
Right. We definitely need questions, folks. Send us some questions.
That's it.
I can recommend a play by Pearl Cleage that is a utopian play. It's called Flying West, and it's about a group of women who leave the horrible lynching world and fly west. And they're all different ages, and everybody's age is central. And I don't want to spoil the story for you, but the older woman saves the day. She's the superhero, and she uses her skills to help the middle-aged and younger women who are all, gathered around her, and they all have farms because they're flying west, and they're, trying to homestead, and they're trying to create an all-Black city, and they're being preyed upon by the white supremacists around them, and they try to figure it out. It's called Flying West by Pearl Cleage, Cleage.
That's fantastic. Jennifer, we're kind of talking over you.
Oh no, I just answered. And then
okay. All right, Gillian.
I'm cheating because of I'm really bad at recalling things without prompts. But now that someone said it, and thank you very much, Knitting in Binary, Granny Weatherwax.
Of course. I mean, she is kind of that model of the crone. Although Nanny Ogg as well. And that's
Nanny Ogg is
interesting.
not so good on the aging thing. She's much more constant in her reactions to life. Granny Weatherwax, you can trace her aging and her reaction to aging through every single novel. She's fully aware of her age all the time.
But isn't that partially what's interesting? So one of the pieces of advice I expect all of us give to baby writers is never have one of anything. If you have one of anything, you will fall into stereotypes. It's extraordinarily hard not to. But the moment you have two older women, you can then generate conversations about aging. So that one of the things that makes Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Ogg who they are is because they argue about what aging should be. That they aren't offering us just one model of aging. And of course, there are the other witches around as well. Sorry, I was going to mention there's one person we've all forgotten, and that's Captain Janeway in Star Trek.
She's not old enough.
She's older than I am now.
I read her right from the beginning as in
Really?
her early 40s.
Oh, I don't. Okay, we need to look that up. Does anybody in the audience know how old Captain Janeway is? Tell us. Can I just answer? Somebody said Heinlein never had an older woman as a protagonist. It's his very last novel in which he does, To Sail Beyond the Sunset. And much of Maureen's biography is actually Heinlein's biography, which is interesting all on its own. Well, we won't go there because that's not what this is about. We've just had the 15-minute warning. We're getting so many cool suggestions. Hell's Park, the principal character is not a young woman, and Skeen in the Skeen books by Joe Clayton. So there are things out there. So, and When It Changed by Joanna Russ, the age of the women was irrelevant. Actually, they're all in their 20s. So I'm not quite sure about that one. Gillian, I should explain.
I just wanted you suggested earlier that if our books were particularly pertinent to a question, we raised them.
Yes.
Year of the Fruitcake wasn't one woman at perimenopause. It was a whole group of them trying to deal with aging in a city that doesn't like women over 40. And one of them, and they're evaluating, one of them is an alien evaluating. It's the Keanu Reeves thing, but with a perimenopausal woman with a group of friends who like eating chocolate and committing snark. And but what you were saying before about having more than one gives you a choice, that was what I wrote it, but I was expecting much deeper it turned out the choice was let's talk about chocolate. They talk about chocolate a lot.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sorry?
I don't quite understand.
Okay. You get a few Canberra women together.
Right.
In a situation where one of them is an alien observer. And so there's a whole bunch of aliens analyzing every single word all the women said. They spend 3 pages saying, why do they talk about chocolate all the time? Because I did what I did for my other book. I did some checks with, I decided I wasn't going to write about myself only. I was going to write about any women in this situation. And it turns out that women in Canberra in their mid to late 50s, when they get together in a group, are more likely to talk about chocolate and coffee than they are to talk about their own children.
Okay, so that's brilliant, but I'm just going to add in a couple of things. Jude Marie reckons that Janeway was about 35 at the start, which actually shocks me, but may relate to how old I was when I watched it. And somebody's saying, what's the definition of older women here? Over 30, over 40? Oh, actually, Kate Mulgrew was 40 when she played Janeway and 51 the last time. But I think that's the point. The definition of older women is so cultural. I mean, I thought of my grandmother as old, and I look at pictures of her when she was my age now, and she dressed to look older. You know, I looked at a picture of her and me standing together and worked out that she was 52 at the time, the same age as I am. She looked miles older than I do. She didn't smoke, she didn't drink. It was absolutely the way she constructed her own age and what that meant to her. And I don't particularly go out of my way to look younger than I do. So I don't know, what do we think old is? Yeah, Shane
That's what I
said,
was saying right at the beginning about it depends upon where you are.
yeah.
It's a regional, it's a cultural thing. So I've got a whole bunch of books where I've got women in their 40s, but I don't regard them as older because I'm 59. So it's also personal.
Hmm. And I'm just looking at, somebody says when they were 16, when they were young, 16 to 20-year-olds seemed impressive and mature, and now in the 30s, much rather be reading about women in middle age. So it's not a science fiction book, but one of the books that I find really indicative of people's own sense of their own age is Georgette Heyer's book. And of course, I've momentarily, a civil contract. And it's the one in which Jenny marries Adam because Adam can't marry the woman he's in love with because he needs money to save the family estate. So he marries Jenny, who's a rich merchant's daughter. And when I was young, I hated it. And when I was in my 30s, I thought, actually, this makes sense. And now I'm like, go, Jenny, a marriage based on friendship and courtesy and actually treating each other people well and not having hysterics at the breakfast table. So I think to come back to that much earlier point, there are those books that we change our relationship to. Andrea, you look like you want to come in. Please come in.
Oh, no, I was just smiling at your description and of the change of reading the book. So it's interesting because I was thinking about Margaret Hamilton, who is in Wizard of Oz. And then she had a really impossible time playing anything else. I mean, she got stuck as the, evil witch character. And yet, I remember like that was one of my favorite characters. I didn't realize it was my favorite character, but I enjoyed all of her moments. And she was, wonderful. And so now when I watch that movie, this is one of those changing things. I have more compassion for Margaret Hamilton, and that's what the Wicked is about. Wicked is about the wicked witch. So
I love that book so much.
So then you get to write that and revisit a story and then say, well, who is this person? And I do remember as a child doing all of those roles. I would do her. I wouldn't necessarily do Glinda. I would do, the Wicked Witch, of course. And you're a pretty little dog too. And I nailed it.
And it's amazing how as you get older, you do start to feel sympathy with the witch and not the dog.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. I say that as a dog lover.
Yes, right.
Can I repeat the title, by the way? The book, as opposed to the musical, is Wicked by Gregory Maguire. And it's absolutely not from the witch's point of view, but much more interesting from the people who knew her growing up. And they kind of create between them. It's a masterpiece of writing, well worth reading. So I've got a few other ones. Oh yes, Old is Older Than Me, somebody said. I think that's fine, and absolutely. We've got that as well. We've got The Stagman by Robin McKinley. Somebody's put science fiction and fantasy has not really dealt with the troops of Blackjack Davy. How can you leave your husband dear? How can you leave your baby? Women who walk off and leave their responsibilities behind. We think of any good examples of that, Gillian?
Fairy tale fantasy does a lot of it, but they don't always do it with older women. In fact, you don't see a lot of old women doing deeply responsive roles in fairy tale fantasy. But one of the great tropes is the young woman leaving everything behind and walking into the strange land.
The one I've just thought
I'm
of.
the person who can never think of any titles. So,
right.
but I've read lots of them.
Yeah, the one I've just thought of is a book I adored, Joe Walton's Life Load, which is finally available on Kindle. It used to be only available as an S for hardback, because one of the characters in there is a very old lady who comes back from the magical West. And what she originally was the daughter of the Lord of the Manor. And she planned to go to the West to study, and there's a huge plague, and she's left as the sole heir. And she can't leave until she's had a baby to be the next heir. And she stays, she has her son, she's bitter about it, she never wanted to marry. He turns 1 year old, and she goes. And a lot of her character is formed around the bitterness of that year when she was forced to stay and get married and have a legitimate baby in order to provide an heir for the manor, which was not how she saw her future at all. And now she's having to deal with some of the legacy, even though it's like 5 generations on, everybody she knew, including her 1-year-old son, is dead and gone. There are still legacies of she walked out and abandoned everybody because she had a life load, and her life load was magic. It's an amazing book. Other thoughts? Oh yes, somebody said, oh yes, life load. Oh, we've got Bujold's Paladin of Souls. Bujold explicitly references tales of young people heading off for adventures. But in a sense, we're thinking more of old people who head off for adventures. And
that's
old
what I'm
women
saying.
who
I can
just say,
think of lots of
stuff it.
examples of one and none of the other. It's a pattern.
I can't think of many older female characters who just say, I'm done. I'm going off to do my thing. But there must be. Do we have any older women space pirates? I don't know. Oh,
Actually,
what about
David
Doreen
Webber doesn't
Tombstone?
Honor Harrington. I hate saying Honor Harrington. It's so hard in Australian English. Doesn't she do that at one stage? And when she's older,
She
doesn't she?
ages, which is rather nice. He
But
lets her
she
age.
also walks away at one
Right.
point
I
and
gave up
says,
on the
I've
series.
done my work.
Right. I gave up on the series for the stupidest of reasons. He doesn't understand British constitutional politics, and he backed his world building into a corner. But I loved those books at the time. And we've got the 5-minute warning. Right, so we will end there. Do any of you have a title you would desperately like us to go out and read? Pick a book, or a film, or a game, or anything.
Well, the one I mentioned before was The New Moon's Arms. So that is definitely, that was like, yes, read that soon.
And I've forgotten the name of her French one, but that would work as well.
Oh, yes.
The Salt Roads. The Salt Roads by Narlow Hopkinson also has some cracking older female characters. Bitter and twisted and passionate.
Yes.
Okay, while you two of you are thinking, wave at me when you've had a thought. I'm going to recommend Deep Light by Frances Harding for a minor character, which is the mother of the female protagonist, because it's an interesting depiction of a troubled and difficult mother-daughter relationship, which is reconciled without smoothing over the cracks. They find a way to live with each other without it all getting mushy, which I really appreciated. Gillian.
I'm going to recommend the book I always recommend when I'm desperate. The Swan Book by Alexis Wright, which is Indigenous Australian writing using Indigenous Australian culture as the underpinning. So you don't know how old people are, you know how they fit in the community where they're elders. It's particular. It's really impossible to explain, but it's the most amazing, bizarre book, and most people don't know it as fantasy because it's a big literary fiction in Australia, and people don't read Australian fiction mostly.
Right.
So Alexis Wright, the Swan Book, it does have, you never escape how old someone is, and the older women are just as dynamic as absolutely everybody else. So it's brilliant.
So that was me signaling to the coffee bearer. Jennifer, over to you. Anything you want to recommend?
I can never think of titles on cue, but one thing I would like to see and maybe get recommendations for, I would like some post-retirement stories for women.
Yeah.
You see so many for older men where they've been long since retired, but then they're either called back or maybe they start something new, and you just don't see that for women. Like, so what about the women who did have a family, raised their family, now they're like, all right, now I'm ready for my own adventure, sort of a thing.
Back to that changing gear, and we have to end now, but I'm going to tie in with that because I have a comment from Knitting in Binary that points out that the one genre that does this brilliantly is cozy mysteries, which are full of retired women, poking their noses in, doing new things. I've just been watching Rosemary and Thyme back to back. So what we need is more cozy mysteries set in space with retired women who've abandoned their homes and gone off with Wild Jack Davy. And on that note, can I say thank you to everybody for a great panel. Please, people, do pick up the books of our authors. They're all available on Amazon, because I checked. Sorry, the Evil Empire, but they're easy to get hold of. And do please check Discord, where people have been writing down a cracking list of titles. Thank you. You can kick us out now, Sunny Jim. Thank you all. That was huge fun.
What?
Sarah.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I'm sorry I lose track of them. I'm full of books, but I can't think of them when I'm asked, ever.
I know.
Oh, don't worry. I've been known to say to Edward, what's that book with the yellow spine? You know, he's the bibliographer around here.
I can think of movies and TV shows, and then I can never think of the books. I'm like,
When I have to write things, I
You
walk
could have
along
said
my bookshelf and look at titles, trying and use that as finding out, as reminding me.
When I no longer had my office, I suddenly realized that the way I'd shelved my books was my memory, that I was used to looking along the books. So when we moved here, I rearranged the study. So I'm looking at the books, they're not behind me. And it's not that I necessarily look at them, it's that something about having them in front of me works as the memory room.
Yes. And that's what I do, and I can't do that sitting here.
Yeah.
So
I'm struggling on children.
I'm fine on theory because I've read all the books. I'm
Right.
lousy on the actual examples because they're not in front of me.
And whereas for me, it's I can't do children's and YA at the moment because we have a lodger in the children's and YA room, and I haven't been there since March. We took somebody in who's stranded in this country because of COVID. So.